Hello everyone, my name is Eric Colleary. I'm the Klein Curator of Theater and Performing Arts here at the Harry Ransom Center, and I'm joined by Amy Armstrong, who is Head of Manuscripts Cataloging and an archivist here at the Ransom Center. And we're here today to share with you selections from the papers of Harry Houdini and the Magic collections at the Ransom Center, which just completed a 2-year recataloguing under Amy's supervision. So we will be talking a little bit today, basically sharing with you some of the items in the collections. We'll be answering your questions, so please feel free to post those in the discussion on the events page. And we'll also be talking a little bit about how you can access these collections, both on site and also at home. So yeah, thanks so much, Amy, for joining us today.
I'm so excited to be here. This is one of the most interesting collections I've processed, and it was very different for various reasons, and so I can't wait to let people know about my experience and to show some of my favorite items.
So this is a little bit unique. I think when most people think about Harry Houdini, they're probably, especially a collection of Houdini, they're thinking about maybe like a collection of handcuffs or weights and chains, or they're thinking about like water torture cells or something like that. That's not really what we have here. This is more of an archive. So can you maybe explain a little bit what an archive looks like?
Sure. Well, basically, for the Ransom Center, we collect the papers of writers and performers and artists and photographers. And so what we have here are really the personal papers of the magician Harry Houdini. And so what we have in this particular collection are some of his correspondence, a lot of his bits of his writings. He was an avid collector, and as you know, and I'm sure many of our viewers do, that he was had a massive library in magic, spiritualism, and theater, and even other topics. And so I would say about half of the collection is actually material that he collected about magicians, magic, spiritualism, and other magicians throughout time. And so in this case with Harry Houdini, I brought out a few selections to kind of give an overview of the type of material we have. But this is kind of what, if you come into our reading room and you request some material from the Harry Houdini papers versus the Harry Houdini collection, which we also have, and we can describe the difference between the two, you would be served up with a box just like this that has the material that as I've organized it. And I think what would be helpful to give a little background about how the collection came here and why it was such a challenge.
It was a real challenge, and Amy, you've done an incredible job on this. This collection was purchased originally in 1927 after the death of Houdini by a gentleman named Messmore Kendall, who was a real estate agent and a theater producer. I think he's credited actually with creating one of the first purpose-built cinemas in New York City. A really remarkable man who had collected a lot of different major collections, but the largest of them seems to have been the papers of Harry Houdini. So he got those in 1927 from Houdini's widow, Bess, and it was a massive collection. He originally went to the house with the understanding that he was getting the dramatic library. And then when he got there, he also found that there was still a whole bunch of other papers and other items that was going to be really interesting for other people to see. So he bought all of it, as much as was there at the time. And then many years went by, and in 1958, the Messmore Kendall collection was purchased by the Hoblitzell Foundation in Dallas. Carl Hoblitzell was the founder of the Hoblitzell Interstate Theater vaudeville circuit, which Harry Houdini performed on in the South. And that collection was then donated to the University of Texas at Austin in 1958. When it arrived in this big van filled with all kinds of things. It wasn't just Houdini's papers, it was the rest of the whole Kendall collection. And over the years, as Kendall was collecting, it became a little bit blurry what was Houdini's and what was maybe the noted theater critic, late 19th century theater critic, William Winter, whose collection was also owned by Kendall, or anything that maybe Kendall had just purchased separately. So when it arrived, it was really a bit of a mess. Things were sort of disorganized. Papers were mixed together. There was a lot of material about Houdini that dates after Houdini's death. And over the years, we've tried to make this available and organized and accessible in some way, but it really took, it took 2 years actually of closing the collection down in Amy's dedicated time to really figure this collection out. How did that happen? What was that process like?
Well, I have to say it was a little bit overwhelming at first because the collection is very vast. There's art, there's a few artifacts, there's periodicals, and then we had what was called the Magician's Collection, which has a lot of material about magicians. And there was a theory that most of it probably belonged to Houdini in some way. It was separated out at one point here when it arrived at the Ransom Center. And so Eric was very interested in reuniting that material so it could share the same provenance. And so in archives we talk about provenance, and that's basically who owned the material, because we're really interested in capturing that chain of custody. And so,
that says something. That says
right.
something about his collecting practices and what he found interesting.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so I had to go through the Magic Collection, and Magician's Collection rather, which we've since called the Magic Collection, to kind of look for clues of signs of ownership that Houdini, that it was somehow Houdini's. And of course there were letters in there that were written to him, so that was obvious. He acquired a lot of his material from Henry Evans Evanian, who was a British magician, and so his name often appeared on the back of playbills and letters. And also just using the context and the clues to try to merge that back together. And in the same token, I also couldn't leave the Magician's Collection in the way that it was, and I wanted to really kind of fix that up a little bit too. So I was working with both those collections, and then we have the Houdini Collection, which is material that we've acquired through auction or through other means that he probably owned, he did own at one point in time, but it didn't come directly from his estate. And so all of these collections really need to be used in unison if you're interested in studying Houdini, magic, performance, vaudeville, because it's pretty spread out.
Yeah, and so my colleague Jen, who's manning the computer over there, if she could post, there's a page on our website that lists the different collections that relate to magic here at the Ransom Center. And what we have are finding aids, what we call finding aids. They're inventories of the different collections. So there you will find the inventory, the finding aids for the Harry Houdini papers, the Harry Houdini collection, the magic collection, and then also other sort of strategies for searching for some of Harry Houdini's books in the library and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If you're just joining us too, I just want to mention again that I'm Eric Colleary. I'm the curator for theater and performing arts here at the Ransom Center.
And I'm Amy Armstrong. I'm an archivist here at the center.
And we're talking about the Harry Houdini papers and the magic collections of the Ransom Center, sharing with you some of the highlights of the collection that just recently reopened and how you can use it. So yeah, let's, I don't know if there are any questions yet. Nope, not yet. Feel free, if you have questions, you can add those into the discussion field on the events page, so we'll be looking out for those. So yeah, let's take a look at some of the things that you pulled. These are sort of like a selection of maybe some of our favorite things or some of the things that we found interesting or sort of shared the diversity, a little bit of what's in the collection.
Yeah, and so I'll just give a little disclaimer. As an archivist, you know, I'm working intensely with the collection for at least a year, in this case longer. And so I acquire a lot of knowledge through the material and through also research and reading things to help me identify the material and understand its context. And so as I'm looking at any kind of archival collection, I feel very intimately connected to the individual, and it's often not the things that other people might think are super interesting, but I'm just like a voyeur in that way and very interested in the human aspect of these people. I mean, they are artists and they're creators and they're famous, but at the end of the day, they're all people. So I really like those aspects that really show that. And so I'll just start off with, as a dog person and as a pet lover, as was Houdini and Bess. This was one of my, and unfortunately this one is so small, but I think it's been shared in other types of online publications and even in books. But this is Houdini and his dog Charlie. And what I love about this image, and actually Bess and Houdini loved their pets. They never had children, and so they really considered their pets their children. And so Charlie often traveled with the family on any of their tours. And so I like this one also because, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but in my mind, and see what you think, I think this looks like Sean Penn.
Oh, it does a little. It looks remarkably like Sean.
It's really, and he's looking very handsome here in this hat. And then this. Oh.
It's also small too. So I mean, I feel like knowing that this belongs to Houdini. This photograph, actually, this isn't just any photograph of Houdini and his dog. This is actually Houdini's personal photograph.
Yeah.
It's possible that this was actually a travel photograph. It's small enough that he could have taken it with him.
That's right. That's right. And then I like this one because here we have Houdini dressed very sharply in driving clothes, along with Bess, who also looks very regal, and Charlie in the back. And then we have here Martin Beck, who was credited for discovering Houdini. When Houdini and Bess first started out, they had, it almost seemed like they really weren't going to make it in this field. I mean, he was starting to think about other avenues to make money. They had done everything. They had traveled in really kind of substandard sorts of, for what we know him to for him to have become, that he started out really in a lot of really interesting settings. And so Martin Beck signed Houdini in 1899, I believe it was, to
part of the Keith Orpheum.
Yes, that's right. And so what's surprising though about this set of material is there isn't very much documenting Martin Beck. And so this is one of the few items that we have that shows his presence in Houdini's life.
Yeah.
And so
one of the exciting things about the Ransom Center and the collections that we have here is that even though we may not have a lot about Martin Beck in the collections of Harry Houdini, he appears all over the place in other collections relating to vaudeville performers or theater producers in the early 20th century. So being able to come here, you get a really holistic sense of the period and the people that were involved, not only by looking at one collection, but sort of bringing them all into communication with each other.
that's right. You know what I was thinking? You know, a lot of people have questions about why people wear gloves and why people don't in an archive.
Yes.
Would you mind answering that for people?
Absolutely. And again, my friend and colleague Jen Tisdale on the computer will be posting a blog post here in a moment onto the Facebook page that you can read. You can see that there are, we don't actually use gloves for paper because there's the possibility that the paper can catch on the glove and tear it. You actually also really need that tactile, the tactile nature of actually feeling it in your hands. So we wash our hands a lot. When it comes to photographs or glass plate negatives or objects, we do use gloves, and we have them right here. So yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. So a couple other things. We've got obviously lots here. We won't probably have time to share everything. So if you see something on the table that you really want to make sure that we talk about, put it in the notes, add that to the discussion, and do ask us questions, please. So a couple other things. There's this is one of my favorite things in the collection. There's actually two posters, two paintings, prototypes for posters for Houdini's famous magic act at the Hippodrome in New York. This was 1918. He did the performance once. He made an elephant, a live elephant, disappear on stage. It was an extraordinary feat. There were no posters actually made of this, and it is one of probably Houdini's most iconic acts, even though it was only done once. But the Hippodrome is this massive theater, so tons of people saw it. And to have these are incredibly unique and rare items. This is one of them. The other one was on display in a recent exhibit, and so I wasn't able to bring it to show you yet because it's still being deinstalled. But this is one of the two, and it's really quite lovely. It's one of the things about an archive that's so exciting is that, Houdini was a writer, for example, and published a lot of books. You can find those books in bookstores or online in many cases, but what makes the archive so unique is that there are letters and photographs and things like this that really don't exist anywhere else, and that's really exciting. We have a few questions, so we're going to take some of these. Yes. So we have a question from John Cox. We actually have two questions from John. One of them is, there's on the finding aid for the Harry Houdini papers, it lists a seed. And they're sort of impressive, actually, when you look at this really long list of the inventory. It's so detailed, and again, that's that's a lot of labor. But it even goes so far as to catalog a seed.
Yeah, that's right. And that, I would have to say, this collection is sort of an anomaly in that way. This is really ends up being sort of an item level description, and that's not typically how we describe some of our more modern collections. But I knew that this collection would be of great interest, and that people might be using the finding aid as a research tool. And so I wanted to be able to provide as much information as I could so people could be very specific, even when they come to visit, what they wanted to look at. And so the seed, that was something and this kind of stuff happens a lot in an archive. There'll be a random, lapel pin or a button, and you're like, okay, did this fall in the box? Is this purposeful? Does this have a meaning? And you're sort of trying to piece it together, and I really don't even know if it's a seed. I really couldn't identify it, but that's the best description I could come up with based on what it looked like. And so hopefully one of our visitors or one of our scholars will be able to piece that together and figure that out for us. I always welcome feedback actually on our finding aids, because I'm not a magic expert. I'm not a performing arts expert. We do have an expert here, but I basically use research and try to figure out what things are, but I don't know, and so I'm always very interested in receiving feedback and corrections from people who know a lot more than I do.
An enormous amount of research actually goes into just creating the finding aid to go online. And Amy, you've done, again, an incredible job doing that. But that's also the beginning of the research, that first finding aid. That's the opportunity now where we welcome people into the Ransom Center to use these collections, and even more research comes out of that. So that's really, really exciting at the beginning. So if you figure out that seed, please do let us know. We're eager to figure that out. So there's a question about what's also inside this lovely green box here, which is actually empty. It's very dramatic, I know, but it actually it came to the Ransom Center. It's been about 15 years or so now. This was a gift from one of the lawyers of the estate of Harry Houdini, who had collected a number of papers in sort of legal material, including a copy of Houdini's will. And that all was here in this box. Those papers, because it's not an ideal situation in an archive to store papers in a box like this, and also it's a little bit hard to open, so we don't want to keep opening and closing this box. We took them out, and now they're in beautiful boxes like this. So now the box is more sort of a display object, if you will, but it's really, really wonderful. We actually have one of the items that was in that box here on the table. This is a really wonderful and important piece. This is what's called a lettergram. You see a lot of these in the collection. It's got Houdini's photos on the top with a little note that says, "Please pardon my incivility in this letter. It has been rushed to you under stress of business and written in the dressing room. Therefore, all formalities like dear sir, dear madam, etc. have been omitted." He's basically saying, I'm so sorry, I'm going to write this like a modern day text message. It's going to be, no formalities. It's going to be just to the point. And so he would use these to sort of get notes across to people. Underneath it, though, is actually not a letter from, it's not from Houdini, but a letter from Bess Houdini, his wife. This is written several years after Houdini's death, and it refers to a code that Bess and Harry Houdini had with each other. And this was a code that they used for a number of years when they were trying to debunk spiritualists. And they would do sort of mind-reading sort of tricks, and so they would use this code system to be able to send messages to each other. And she basically explains this code in the message. And I'm not going to give the code away because I feel like that's an encouragement for you to come and do some research. But I will read a little bit of it, which just says, this message was written by Beatrice Houdini. The original was written in 1913, having been destroyed. The name Rosabella was substituted. The first name chosen was Mike. Both names were endearing names. Rosabella is the title of a song the first Houdini heard me sing in 1894 when they met. It's really sweet. And so basically, she had taken this telegram, this little note, because the code was really important after Houdini died. Mediums were trying to prove that Houdini's spirit was still out in the world, and that if he could give her a code back, that it would prove that spirits existed. And so she kept this code secret for a number of years. She put this telegram in a safe deposit box. There's an envelope that presumably had a key to that safe deposit box, and both of those were in the green box here from the lawyers. So it's presumed that after Bess passed away, the safe deposit box was emptied, and the contents were included amongst other papers here in this green tin. Amy, maybe, well, actually, it looks like we have another question, so let's take another question.
All right.
And if you're just joining us, my name is Eric Colleary. I'm the Klein Curator for Theater and Performing Arts here at the Harry Ransom Center at UT Austin.
And I'm Amy Armstrong. I'm an archivist here at the center.
And we're talking a little bit about the Harry Houdini papers at the Ransom Center and the magic collections that we have. So we have two questions. Ray Lynn Tipping, are those pictures digitized? That's a great question. Most of these pictures have not yet been digitized, and we will be looking forward to, in the future, working on digitizing more of this collection and getting it available online. We really appreciate the support of the NEH and other grant funding institutions and donors who have helped us digitize our collections in the past.
And if I may add something, in the finding aid, and it's not appearing there yet, but there will be linkages to some of the description in the finding aid with material that has already been digitized and is in Content DM. And so the finding aid suggests that hasn't yet been linked up, but it will be hopefully in the next week or so. And so many of the posters that are described have been digitized, as well as the scrapbooks. And so you can see some of that material already. And then eventually that'll be linked up with the finding aid.
So again, my colleague Jen Tisdale will be posting links for the digital collections of some, but not all of our magic playbills and posters, and some of the Houdini scrapbooks that are part of this collection. So that's a really great way, actually, that if you can't make it to Austin, Texas, you can actually browse through these collections at home from the comfort of your own computer. There's another question here from Amy Bush. Do you rely on interviews as part of your research, Amy?
Actually, at this point, there was no way for me to do that with this collection for obvious reasons, but it's a good question, and I think that I have used all sorts of resources with other material and other collections, including recorded interviews, transcripts of interviews, and I really appreciate the question. Thank you.
What are some of the other archives that you've processed here at the Ransom Center, just out of curiosity?
Well, the last couple that I processed was Kazuo Ishiguro.
Nobel Prize winner.
Right, that's right, and Ian McEwan. And is it okay for me to say what I'm working on currently?
Yes, absolutely.
A colleague and I are both working on the Arthur Miller papers, so we just started that a few weeks ago, and so that's been really interesting. So I'm switching gears in eras and centuries, and I'm happy to be back talking about Houdini, but we're very deeply into our research and processing of Arthur Miller.
And to do the research for a collection like Houdini, obviously you weren't able to interview Houdini or any family members, but there was a lot of resources that you were able to use to sort of figure out dates and places and that sort of thing, plus the archive itself.
Right, that's right, right. I've used a number of websites, and I used a number of published biographies that were sort of my go-to Bibles, if you will, while researching Harry Houdini, and mainly also a lot of the associated magicians that maybe aren't as well known among lay people, but certainly people who are very interested in magic and magic history certainly will know these names, and they're present throughout the collection.
Yeah, great. Show us, what is this thing up here in the front, this little sort of mini box thing?
Yeah, well, I have several items that are all sort of related, and this has to relate to Houdini's own research in magic. One thing, as I mentioned before, he was an avid collector of anything associated with magic or magicians from the past, and that also included trying to track down magicians who may or may not still be alive. And one of the magicians that he really wanted to track down, and I'm not going to say his first name correctly, I'm sure, is Williba Frickel, who had practiced magic for 60 years, and there was rumor, or it was said, that he was one of the first modern magicians, and that he presented his act in normal clothes rather than very over the top, sort of flowy robes and gowns, more costume-like. And so I have several items here. And I guess one of the first ones, Houdini made an attempt to visit him in 1903. And he just kind of showed up. I think he was in Berlin at the time for an act, and took the train to the village where he was currently living, and just stopped by and announced and wasn't permitted entry. And so we have here a telegram that Houdini was likely sending back to Bess, and it says, "Freckle refused to see me, left no stone unturned, love Eric," which he rarely signed his name in that format. I mean, even other things to Bess, he would still sign Houdini.
His actual name was Eric Weiss?
That's right. Yes, and so I believe he goes back to Berlin, and I think suddenly is sent a letter where Frickle is aware of who he is and invites him back. And so he arrives that day, and that morning arrives at the home to only learn that Frickle had died just that morning. And so he didn't get an opportunity to visit with him. And so here we have a few items documenting his visit there. And so he had collected some of these postcards that are from the village, and it says, "On arriving in," excuse my German pronunciation, "Kutschenbroda, and finding Frickle dead, I returned to Berlin. I mailed this postcard so as to remember the date." And then he has another postcard later that is mailed this on the day of Frickle's death. And so he's collected these, both of these postcards, all 5 of these postcards, as well as this pin that he was given by Frickle's widow. And it says, "Mrs. Frickle made me a present of this. Mr. F used to wear it." And so we've created this housing that allows the item to stay intact with the paper that documents that gift.
It's a great example of how when an archive comes to a place like the Ransom Center, we're committed to caring for it in perpetuity. It's not just something that's got to last a few years, it's got to last really forever. So creating housings like this is actually part of that care and longevity.
That's right. And I just have a couple more items just related to this I will go show real quickly. This is a carbon copy outgoing letter that Houdini wrote to his friend Frederick Eugene Powell. And he's going into a description of other things, but then he goes on to say, "So you remember Frickle. Did you read my chapter regarding him? Now that Mrs. Frickle is dead, my promise of silence can be broken, for she told me why Frickle would not see me that eventual day. It appears that he once had an assistant, a lady, for the suspension, and they had a natural son. He was under the impression that I was a grandson and wanted money. But when he discovered who I really was, he was very anxious to meet me, but fate decreed otherwise." And so the letter also has all of the, what's so wonderful, there aren't a lot of outgoing carbon copy letters from Houdini, but the letters that are there, and the incoming letters are full of magic, kind of the grapevine, magic gossip, magic history. And so everyone knew that Houdini was very interested in making these connections with people and also collecting material, and they would send him items. And this is it's unclear what this actually says in pencil, but on it Houdini wrote, "These are the last words written by Frickle. From his dress suit after death, Houdini."
That's actually something that comes up a few times in different parts of the collections, is you get those last words, or we actually have in the collection Houdini's last diary entry and the last letter that he writes to his wife Bess. Things like that, like you were saying earlier, it captures something about the person, the human being, and not just the man that he's sort of thought of now as a legend.
That's right.
Yeah. We have another question. This is from Jody Lekby Chan. What was the most surprising thing you learned about Houdini? It's a really tough question, I have to say.
That is a really tough question. I think this is something that I learned, but it was reinforced by processing the collection, which is Houdini's tendency for forming feuds with various friends and colleagues, and
Feuds.
feuds.
Sort of, yeah, okay.
Yeah. He would engage in a lot. He was a bitter rival with many people, and especially people who were attempting to steal his act. And he would be relentlessly, I mean, he would annihilate people basically. And so there were a few letters in the collection that I pulled, and there's many more where Houdini made a notation to kind of share his thought on the person. And one of them, which I thought was funny, and I highlighted it in the finding aid because of his annotation is so interesting. It starts off, it's got these two pictures from a printed brochure more than likely, and it says, "Crook, liar, thief, ingrate. I helped this fellow along," and it's hard to, Houdini's typing is always really bad and a lot of misspellings, and so I don't know where he's going with here, but he offered to put me in jail to Alan and stole $1,000, and then it's something about, then he went ahead and it added something else, which I actually can't make out, but that is not a rarity in the collection, and so I also like those moments. I mean, and clearly, like, he was documenting this for us.
Yeah.
Because he knew how he felt about this person. So there was very much a conscious effort in documenting his thoughts for posterity.
It's an extraordinary thing, actually, in an archive to have so many letters written by the person whose archive it is.
Right.
Usually you write that letter, especially in the early days before emails or photocopy machines, you write the letter and it just sort of goes out there and you never see it again, and you only have one half of the conversation.
That's right.
But it seems like that's not Houdini's practice.
He did maintain a lot of carbon outgoing correspondence, but not as much as there must have existed. But I do, it definitely exists, and that's been noted in the finding aid in cases where that has been interfiled with incoming correspondence, so you can directly go and find those pieces of correspondence that he wrote.
Great. Yeah, similarly, I think one of the things that surprised me actually was how I knew that Houdini was a big collector. This library that he had is sort of something of legend. There were articles in the newspaper, contemporaneous at the time, sort of talked about just floor to ceiling, just stacks of this playbills and books and scrapbooks and all of these things that not only he had collected himself, but scrapbooks that other magicians and other people had sort of put together. And I guess I'm still sort of wrapping my head around all the things that came in as what we know as the Messmore-Kendall collection, but is actually probably from the Houdini library. But because Kendall sort of mixed it in with his own stuff, it's really hard to sort of find that out. A few examples of that. For example, this is a wonderful scrapbook by Professor S.S. Baldwin. This is his, he was a magician. This scrapbook Baldwin put together about his 4th tour around the globe, it says. It's an incredible scrapbook. It is chock full of images, prints, photographs, newspaper clippings, a few letters, and you can actually flip through this online, again on the digital collections for Houdini's select scrapbooks. It's something that actually his daughter sent Houdini after Baldwin's death. And we know this actually from a letter from his daughter that accompanied the scrapbook at the time. It's a really extraordinary piece and sort of shows how he was interested in what other magicians were doing. But it wasn't limited to magicians either. We have things like this, which is from an actress, a late 19th century actress, a very famous one, named Lotta Crabtree. And this is a copy of her last will and testament. And there is a letter actually from Lotta to Houdini in the collection, and I only found that out because of the finding aid. It would have been impossible to find it before. But it's an extraordinary thing. They had a brief friendship, and he was really interested in other actors and other performers and what made them so good. He was clearly trying to study performance and get a sense of what made an energetic and dynamic performer popular. We only know that this will belonged to Houdini. It wasn't being kept with the Houdini papers. On the back of it, on the back of the sheet, it says, I paid $7.60 to obtain this copy, Houdini. So every once in a while you get really lucky and you get that sort of identifying marker where he's sort of marking it for his own budget, or at least being able to say, no, this one's mine, or I'm really proud that I got this one thing, or something that links it back. But oftentimes, sadly, that might not be the case.
That's right. Yeah, that's a pity.
It looks like we have, oh my goodness, a few more questions. Before we get to those questions, we should just sort of introduce ourselves again. My name is Eric Colleary. I'm the Klein Curator for Theater and Performing Arts here at the Harry Ransom Center.
And I'm Amy Armstrong. I'm an archivist here at the center, and I process the Houdini papers.
And we're here talking about the reopening of the Houdini collection and the magic collections here at the Ransom Center. We're sharing some of the items from those collections, and we're also sharing some information about how you can access the collections here in Austin, Texas, and also at home. So we've got, looks like 3 different questions. Michael Sanchez asks, are there other archives with Houdini collections you have contact with? There are actually a whole lot of Houdini collections out there, a lot of them in private hands. We would love to be in touch with more of them. One of those collections, a big collection, is at the Library of Congress, and we did spend some time looking at what they had.
That's right.
Houdini willed his magic scrapbook, a lot of his magic scrapbooks, and his magic book library to the Library of Congress. And so all of that went there after he died. And the rest of it was bequeathed to Bess, his wife, to dispose of as she saw fit, which is what a lot of this stuff is. There is a very large collection we know about that's held by David Copperfield, a private collection of some incredible apparatuses. We don't have a whole lot of actual objects in the collection, and that's something sort of really important to know about the Houdini papers here. This is mostly paper-based, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
So letters, correspondence, photographs, manuscripts.
Yes, and a massive amount of playbills, handbills, posters, particularly in the collected material. And because Houdini was such a diverse collector and had interest in so many broad topics, it's really kind of surprising what you might find in the collected material portion of the collection. And there's one playbill that I was particularly fond of. And I'm not sure how many people have heard of Henry Box Brown. He was a magician, an African-American magician, and in 1849 he placed himself inside a box, not too much unlike many magicians, and mailed his body to Philadelphia to escape the slavery in the South. And so this playbill, Professor H.B. Brown, and it gives a little description of his history. Excuse me, I'm just going to grab a spatula so I can pick this up.
Archival tools. This metal spatulas help us turn pages, especially if you don't have fingernails like me. This is
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. But this is one of 3 playbills in the collection, and I was particularly happy to see this here because it's an area of scholarship that may not be very well studied or well known, is how many African-American magicians there were. And so this playbill says, Professor H.B. Brown, whose escape from slavery in 1849 in a box 3 feet 1 inch long, 2 feet wide, 2 feet 6 inches high, caused such a sensation in the New England states. And it goes on to describe the rest of the story, as well as his wife was his assistant, and his children also performed with him. And so, again, with the collected material, there's such a diversity of performers in there. Women, children, there were some really cute playbills and printed material with sort of prodigy magicians, age 3. And actually, there's a lot of really historical etchings and lithographs of not only magicians, but people who would engage in sort of, what's the word I want to use, like fire breathers and all kinds of, I can't think of the word I want to use for that, but it's really an amazing collection, the collected material. And that also has a lot of clippings and newspapers, and like I said, playbills and handbills.
It's actually, in the playbills, that's a relatively small one. We have thousands of playbills and broadsides that are massive. And a lot of those, they date back, some of them actually even to the 18th century. A lot of those, and they're for theater, not just for variety entertainment or magic, but for Covent Garden in London, or the Arch Street Theatre in Philadelphia, or sort of these major performance venues. So we also have a question. Let's see. Ned Coleman, are there any items related to his visits or performances in Austin?
I did not see evidence of that in this material. I know that he performed in what is now called, just drawing a blank.
It's now the Paramount.
Yes, the Paramount.
He actually performed here a few times in a few
Yes.
different locations. One of the last times, I believe, if I'm right, either the first time or the last time, I'm not entirely sure, used to be called the Majestic Theater.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And I did not see any playbills or handbills from those performances. And that's another thing that's kind of surprising in the collection is they're really, given his like sort of grueling tour schedule and how often he performed, they're really, relatively speaking, not a lot of his own playbills. And so I've described them really at the item level in the finding aid, Houdini's personally. So what is listed there is what we have.
And that's, I think, really interesting also because it sort of shows that what Bess Houdini was offering Messmore Kendall was the dramatic library originally. And so that wasn't meant to be Houdini's personal magic collection about his career, although there's quite a bit about his career in the collection. There's stuff about his film work.
Yes. Combined with the Harry Houdini papers in the Harry Houdini collection, there is a variety of materials. I would say in the Harry Houdini collection, there's a lot more of the business associated papers like ledgers, business correspondence related to rights, with his attorney and with his accountant. And then the papers, it's really a lot more of the promotional material. So lobby cards, we do have some scripts because he was also in a short radio play called The Man of Mystery, and we actually do have the scripts for those.
Title cards, yeah.
The silent
Fantastic.
film title cards, yes. And actually, some of them are for his own features, but in doing research and trying to put the collection back together, I believe that our silent card film collection actually might have been Houdini's. On the back is written AB, which is the initials of his personal librarian. So, but we couldn't prove that. We weren't really sure. We didn't have the evidence to support that necessarily, so we left that as it is. But
It's fascinating, actually, too, that these title cards, a lot of them are broken in half. And what we do have is actually a note from the 1950s when the collection arrived here that suggests that Houdini was using these title cards to support the playbills in the collection, the broadsides. So it was giving a little bit of backing and helping them sort of stay organized. So they were just sort of discards for him.
That's right.
But actually for people who are interested in movie restoration, especially some of the silent films of Houdini that have been coming out recently, like The Grip Game that only just recently got re-released after almost a century. Yeah, those title cards can be really helpful to see what the style was originally.
and some of them even have like a piece of tape with like a letter. So he was also, using them as for filing folders, like dividers, as you said. So
Extraordinary, really. One of the things that question in this next one brings up is that you did not, in the cataloging, how big is this collection, by the way? Just a sort of rough estimate. There's the Magic Collection, and for those of you who didn't hear before, there's the Houdini papers and the Houdini collection. And we use that to distinguish the papers are the stuff that came directly from the estate through Messmore Kendall. And then the collection, the Houdini collection, is what we call the material that we've sort of personally collected here at the Ransom Center, separate from that over the years.
Actually, I can't remember the amount of boxes, but it's really hard to gauge because so many of the items are in flat file drawers because they're posters. And then we have the scrapbooks, and then we have some framed items.
It's a fairly large collection.
It is.
You did not have the opportunity to read every document.
That's right. No, absolutely not. That is not something that we get the luxury of doing, generally speaking. Although there was a segment of letters that I did spend a little more time with, which are the letters from Quincy Kilby, who is the person who Houdini acquired a lot of his theater-related material from. And There are only, I think, a few of the carbons of Houdini's side of the correspondence, and there's like 4 folders of Quincy Kilby's.
It's actually right here. So I've actually kept the folders. Originally, when I was looking at these folders for Quincy Kilby, because Kilby was responsible for getting so much of Houdini's collection to him, they were so useful in helping us identify parts of the collection that might have belonged to Houdini at some point. When I first started going through the papers before they were processed by Amy, I could only find a small handful of them. I didn't think there were really that many. After the organization and the creation of the finding aids, there are now 4 folders, thick folders, full of these letters from Kilby, and they are rich. They're really interesting. And this is the value, and this is why it was so important to do this recataloging. Without that, it's really hard to find what you're looking for otherwise.
Right, and those letters speak a lot to, and why I was spending more time with them was I was trying to gain information about provenance and things that might be in the theater collection or in other collections. And they're very rich, they're very jolly, good, wonderful letters, and also remarks on Houdini's life. So even though we don't necessarily have a lot of Houdini's side, we still get a lot of Houdini's information via Quincy Kilby.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up another question. Sarah Adams Kitty, who asks, did you find anything that supported, there's a book that came out that makes an argument that Houdini used to work for the US Secret Service.
Right.
Did you find anything to support or deny that?
I did not find anything that supported or denied that.
Okay.
It's a good question.
It's a good question, and I know it's a very popular question out there. Again, that's something that we really encourage people to come here, go through the collections. We have not had the time, we won't be able to have the time to go through each collection. We all have other collections that we're also working with. So we need you to come actually and visit the collections, go through this, do the research and see what you can find. Looks like we still got some more questions, so we'll keep going through those.
That's real exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the questions that we're getting.
Troy Downs wants to know, has Houdini's will been digitized?
We have not digitized it as yet. And I don't know if it exists somewhere else. What we have is a carbon of his will that came in this box, I believe, and is in the Harry Houdini collection. Do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think his will is actually something that's been out there for quite some time. We do have copies of it here, but copies exist elsewhere too. So if you are interested in seeing that and you can't make it here to Austin, like I said, we're going to try to digitize more of the collections, but you should be able to find it out there relatively readily. Let's see. Yes. So a few other things that we can take a look at. Just want to mention again, my name is Eric Colleary. I'm the Klein Curator of Theater and Performing Arts here at the Harry Ransom Center, if you're just joining us.
And I'm Amy Armstrong. I'm an archivist here, and I process the Harry Houdini papers.
And we're sharing parts of the Houdini and magic collections here at the Ransom Center at the University of Texas at Austin. And this is an opportunity really to share some highlights and also invite you hopefully to come and visit us. Or if you aren't able to make it to Austin, Texas, you can see some of the collection online. Anything else that you wanted to share that you pulled?
I think I'll just share one more thing, and this is quite special. This is Houdini's last published book. It was published in 1924, and it's called A Magician Among the Spirits. And this is the culmination of about 30 years of his research in spiritualism and learning the methods of spiritualists. And what's special about this book is the inscription inside, and I'm just going to open and okay. So we see, and it unlikely be able to be read, but it says, "This volume, with changes by the author, was given me by Houdini to be held for any subsequent edition. He considered himself in constant danger because of his investigations and wanted this volume where it would be safe. It was never reprinted, and these manuscript changes are the only copy in existence." And so we have Houdini's signature here, the date, one of the dates, and then a subsequent, actually an earlier date.
For those of you curious the dates, I know some of you are going to be really questioning what the dates are, so can you read the dates?
Oh, yes. The first date here where it says revised copy in pencil is June 26, 1924. And then it says intro and including, I think that's what that says, August 24th, 1924. And so in this volume, he has handwritten edits quite extensively. I'm not happening upon those pages, of course.
It's actually, yeah, that's a significant cut.
And then this section, and then he also taped in little pieces of paper in which he had more edits than could fit on the page. And in situations where that wasn't enough, he went and hand wrote like the addition. So this gives us an idea of what he wanted to correct regarding this subject, which he spent his whole life kind of interested in. And I think it's just really special, and I think it's really interesting that he considered his life to be in danger with something that nowadays we would kind of find not as serious, worth taking someone's life about. But at that time, I mean, there was, Houdini testified before a Senate committee regarding spiritualism, and so it was a serious, here's a good example. After World War I, many people were engaging in seeking spiritualists to help reunite with their loved ones who had died in the war, and so there was a lot of people profiting from that and sort of swindling people, and that's what really upset Houdini the most about it, was that people who were experiencing such deep grief were being taken for a ride, basically, and that has to do with the death of his mother, who he, as he describes in this note, one of the only two women I loved.
Oh. It's really remarkable. So this is one of his most really well-known books, and it has those additions, those corrections, completely new material that's never been seen really before. And I know it's been republished a few times without those notes. He died 2 years later, so that material has never really been published. And again, one of the great resources of being able to come to an archive like this is that it's available now for researchers and publishers. A few other things, I'm just putting on my gloves because I'm going to show you. We have a wonderful collection actually here at the Ransom Center. These are a little tricky, but they're really important and wonderful and important. Yeah, you've got to have them. So these here, this is one of the lantern slides from the collection. Houdini traveled and gave talks for a number of years about spiritualism and trying to debunk it. And this is we have a full series of the lecture slides that he used during those tours. This is just one of them. But we have about 2 boxes worth of these slides.
Yeah, we have almost 2 full copies, almost 2 full sets.
2 full sets, wonderful.
Right.
Yeah. The collection is also complemented by others here at the Ransom Center. So in addition to the papers of Harry Houdini, we also have a very significant collection of the papers of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is probably most known for his writing of the Sherlock Holmes series, but was also a really staunch spiritualist and a good friend of Houdini's, but they also butted heads quite a bit over whether or not spiritualism was real. Houdini felt like it wasn't. Doyle, of course, felt like it was. So one of the things that the collection shows is that relationship in 2 different collections. You can go to Doyle's papers and see letters from Houdini and from Houdini's wife Bess over the years where they're sort of talking about, for example, even just a magician among the spirits. There's a letter from Houdini to Doyle in Doyle's collection where he's asking for permission to publish excerpts out of the writings of several of Doyle's books. There's actually a really remarkable letter here from Bess Houdini, dated December 16th, 1926, so just a couple months actually after the death of Harry Houdini. You'll note that Houdini's pictures here in the upper corner, and also the margins of the paper are in black, which is typical for mourning. The letter is from Bess to Arthur Conan Doyle, where she has clearly received a letter from Doyle mentioning a book project that he is writing about how Harry Houdini, how his spirit basically has survived despite his physical death. And she's a little upset about this. She wants to maintain clearly the friendship and relationship with Doyle and his wife, but she has to say to him, and over the course of 4 pages, that this isn't true. And I really, if I can encourage you to not write this book, I would appreciate it. He loved me so much, she says, that if he could come back to me, he would have by now. And it's really heartbreaking. Other parts of the collection also show aspects of their relationship. A letter like this, for example, there's a whole folder of letters from Houdini to his wife Bess in the collection. This one's dated June 22nd, 1919, and he addresses it to my soulmate wife from San Francisco, California, so he's probably on tour at the time. He says, "Our silver wedding today. No, dear heart, we have had 25 silver weddings. You have truly been my wife, my all. If only my sainted mother were here, how she would nod her head with pride. Do you remember, Essen? We have starved and starred together." I love that. We have starved and starred together. "We have had our little tiffs, but your sunny smile and my good, underlined, he underlines my good, sense always smoothed out the bitterness. I love you, and I know you love me." And then it gets very sentimental and mushy, and I won't read all of that, but it is very sweet. And he signs off by saying, "Yours till the end of the world and ever after, Eric," and then in parentheses, Harry Houdini. He would write these letters. Some of these, I get the impression that these copies are actually drafts that he's writing so that he can make sure that he gets the actual one just right. It's really, really quite sweet. We've got, it looks like, another letter. Vicki Varner, are these slides digitized? No, I'm so sorry. So at the moment, because the collection is only just reopened just a few weeks ago, the only parts of this collection that have been digitized, and you can see the links on Facebook, have been parts of the Magic Playbills and Posters collection, some of which belong to Houdini, and then also a collection of some but not all of the Houdini scrapbooks in the collection. The bulk of those scrapbooks are not Houdini's scrapbooks about himself, but scrapbooks that he collected from other people. We are hoping to digitize more of this collection. Part of this is a labor challenge, and part of it is a funding challenge. And again, we thank people who have donated to the Ransom Center in the past and grant funders who have supported digitization projects that have made this more readily available. That being said, if those are available online, those collections that we have, we will be adding to it, but we really would love to see you come and visit the Ransom Center. It is open to anyone with a photo ID and a sense of curiosity, and I really mean that. Please, please do come and make use of the collections. Jen Tisdale, who's staffing the computer, will post a link to how to access the collections here. Basically, you'll see the hours, you'll see where we're at, you'll see sort of the format for signing up for an account. It's really super easy, and we're here to help you. If you have trouble getting to Austin, and we know that a lot of you are watching from outside of Austin, Texas, we would encourage you, if you have a project in mind, we offer fellowships, a robust fellowship program, and that is a way that we can help support you and make the collections more accessible. And again, my colleague Jen will post the information about the fellowships that or actually the applications are going to be opening up here in just a month or two. Anything else? Any other sort of thoughts about the Houdini collections?
I mean, no. It's a lot.
It's a lot. This was 2 years of your life. This is a really big project.
That's right. I'm really happy to see it completed. And I know that people have already started using it, and that just fills me with such happiness to know that the work that I've put into describing material is actually being used by people. And so I strongly encourage you to come use this collection or any of our other ones.
There's sort of the obvious topics of, like, if you were writing a book or an article about Harry Houdini, or if you're just curious about Houdini, there's obviously lots here that will support that. But there's also all kinds of other topics that could potentially come out of this. You had mentioned some of the collections that he made. There's some stuff about ventriloquism. There's some crime broadsides.
Right. Yes, they're called crime ballads, broadsides that were printed in Britain, and he has a very large collection of them, and some of them are extremely old, and it kind of is a grotesque kind of reminder of different crimes that have taken place, it's in the form of a song or in the form of a poem, and it describes sort of these horrendous crimes. He was very interested in crime and death, It's been stated by many biographers, and it's definitely supported in this collection. I think there's just so many avenues for exploration in this collection, and hopefully through the very detailed finding it, you'll be able to find your entree into it.
Fantastic. We're so excited to be able to share this collection with you. We really hope that you'll be able to come and visit. If not, do check out those digital collections online and stay tuned for hopefully more in the future. But otherwise, thank you so much, Amy, for all of the work that you put into making this collection visible and accessible. And thank you for tuning in and asking so many really wonderful questions. We'll see you later and hopefully see you in the reading room. Thanks so much.
Thanks.